Welcome, I'm Deb Shepard. I'm your host of Spirited Straight Talk. Thank you for joining me on this amazing spiritual journey that we call life. You're in the right place and you didn't land here by accident. My intention is to help you learn to free yourself of things that are holding you back and create a life that truly makes your soul happy. I'll be talking about key insights and interesting topics to help you learn how to powerfully co-create with the universe. I will cover everything from turning your setbacks into triumphs, and my favorite, living your soul's purpose. Of course, I'll be connecting with spirit, your guides, and the favorite one, of course, is your loved ones on the other side. If you're ready to truly stop spinning circles and you're ready to harness the power to co-create an authentic life with spirit, then I hope you join me every week for Spirited Straight Talk. Hello, everyone. I'm here with my favorite person, Dana, my partner in crime, and we're going to talk today about why is suffering a choice? This is a sensitive topic for me because for over 2 decades, I've talked to people about grief and healing and loss and those type of things and going through all those transformations that we go through. But grief and suffering are 2 different animals. Let's put it that way. So for some individuals, and this isn't judging somebody, but it's really about if your only choice of healing is to suffer, that will never help you in life. So we want to say the difference between grief and suffering.
Okay.
And we become basically prisoners of our own suffering. I mean, we go into our head and we have all these things about how horrible something is, and we repeat it over and over and over. And what we want to do is change the idea of how to heal and grieve. So part of this is, well, we've watched these programs or people have told us the stories about how someone did a horrific thing and we want them to suffer. We want them to go to prison. And, my brother worked in Folsom Prison for years. And so someone that commits really horrible crimes, we do want them to suffer, to realize the consequences. But when
it's mainly because we're suffering or they've created suffering.
Right. But do you want to only have the only tool in your toolbox is to suffer and always have that pain that you live your life in that arena versus realizing that suffering is, and I don't want to say it's self-inflicted, but it's realizing that you can get out of suffering so that you're not always living or reliving what happened to you in the past.
Right.
And whether it's from 30 years ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago, you have a choice of how you want to get through that experience that you had. And of course, we've done podcasts where you told your story. And what we said is, or what you said is, that doesn't define you. So you don't continue to suffer from what happened as a child.
And I've separated it.
You separated. So it's an experience, but what do you do with the 2?
Right.
And how do you realize that suffering isn't the only way? And I think that people sometimes don't realize that that's the word, that they're suffering, but we're going to give you some ideas of what it looks like and then how to transform that. Because bottom line, there isn't a person that walks this planet or earth that doesn't have some kind of past experiences that are traumatic.
Right.
And
if you're human, you have traumatic experiences. Yeah.
And doing this work, I used to think, oh, poor me, my story. But what I've learned through my experiences in sessions and teaching is everyone has a story.
Yeah.
And it really helped me realize that my story wasn't more valuable or more important than anybody else's. And, you've seen it where people just come and they're they can't even seem to get up every day and work and not work meaning go do a job, but get up and have a life beyond their suffering.
And I think what we see as grief is one thing, but creating a place of suffering for yourself because of guilt and shame. And that seems to be where it comes from, is the guilt and shame keep you in that place of suffering.
Suffering then makes that situation more valuable. Like the more I suffer, I've had a divorce, I've had a loss of a job, I'm sick with an illness, there's been a loss or a death of some sort. The suffering feels like do you know how much pain I'm in? And I think it's to let other people know how
Mhm.
much, but I also think it keeps you from really having a life beyond the experience.
Mhm.
And I know for both of us, some of our goals is to show people that you can have a life beyond those experiences. And I think that's what the suffering comes up with, is that you believe that you can't have anything better. And you want everyone to know that how hard it is.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
Yeah, I think it is keeping yourself in a place of guilt, shame, and that creates your suffering and your place of suffering.
And we talk about low vibration, and that is a low vibration. And what happens when you go into suffering, you actually attract more suffering because that is your vibration. And so it validates that how you're feeling is correct. But what will you want to do? What the intention is of healing is to find a new compass, to be able to say, I can still have a purpose and a life and happiness beyond what I experienced. And I think it's shifting the mindset with that. And as we know that shame and guilt are low vibrations, joy and happiness are higher vibrations. But then people feel guilty if they have joy and happiness when they've had such a significant experience in life. So that's what really we want to help people change that story for them. And I think the biggest thing is not retelling your story over and over and over, or finding the purpose from your story. So for me, it's been with so much suicide in my life, I've decided to help people understand mental health, be able to understand that suicide and those things that we think it defines us, or that we bring in the guilt and shame, that there is something that we can do by paying forward to, by changing that.
Yeah.
And of course, we know our friend Julie, right?
Yes, yes.
And she lost her daughter from SUDEP.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And
she created the Chelsea Hutchison Foundation.
Correct.
To, number one, to honor her daughter, but because she was not educated that her daughter had a chance of dying from sudden unexpected death and epilepsy, she wants to educate the world about SUDEP.
Right.
And SUDEP can be while you're sleeping, it can be while you're awake. It's just a sudden unexpected death and epilepsy. So anybody who has epilepsy has that risk.
And the doctors told her that she wasn't going to that wasn't going to happen.
Right.
And so what she found through the loss of her daughter, which is traumatic, and watching this story and understanding it, Julie and her family has become pioneers in educating and changing. I mean, they do seizure response dogs, they do monitors, there's so many things that they do to help people. So she took tragedy and changed it into,
she's changing other people's lives,
families. Yeah, absolutely. So when you go through these experiences, are you willing to take that and change the lives of others from what you experienced, versus suffering to the degree of not being able to do anything with your life?
Yeah.
And so that's what Julie found. She found another purpose. And I wish we never met her.
Yeah.
I wish that her daughter was here. I wish that, there wasn't this foundation, but it happened. And then what are you doing with your experiences? What are you doing to educate others or to teach others? And that's one way to really make a change, versus suffering is empowering other people to understand.
That doesn't mean that people aren't going to grieve, right?
Oh, grief is different than suffering.
It means that they don't stay in that place
Yeah.
for a consistent amount of time. You may go there, you may have the grief may never go away.
And it's not supposed to go away. So for Julie and her family, it will be a constant reminder of the loss of their daughter and their sister and their friend. But that's different when you're grieving versus suffering, where you cannot find a life or a purpose beyond that. And my heart goes out to individuals who have, of course, buried children, but what are you going to do from that loss of that child? So it's also with people with sexual assault. For me, I've talked about my husband's suicide, my family members, cousins, friends, those things like that. And also with sexual assault, we now have the #MeToo movement. And so,
but you were a victim of sexual assault.
Absolutely. So
so you've had many traumatic experiences in your life as well. I mean, several different types
Yeah.
of traumatic experiences.
I think what's the big thing for you and I that we've tried to talk about over this time is not to let it define you, that you're beyond those painful experiences.
You're much more than what
You're
happened to
much
you.
more.
Yeah.
So how do you find value in those past experiences? Don't continue to be the victim of those circumstances. And I think that's the key, is those things have happened. They're horrific, but don't let them still have your power.
Right.
And I think we still give them the story or the power so that we still feel like we're that victim in that scenario. And that's the suffering piece.
Do you think some people choose to suffer and choose to play their story over and over again? Or do you think it's more that they're just stuck in that and can't get themselves out of it?
I think there's a combination of layers to this. So first of all, their story becomes a value that they cannot do certain things because of what happened to them. And I do understand that PTSD and certain things do have a situation where some people can't do certain things because of the past. I get that. I respect that. I give them value for that. But your life isn't still just that. And so how do you work the tools? I also feel like some people only have one tool in their toolbox versus multiple tools. And so having grief, having sorrow, going back and reflecting is one thing, but does it consume you? And do you become addicted to the suffering? And that's what we talk about a lot. Are you addicted to that story?
Yeah. And not that, I mean, we see this occasionally, not that it's the main point, but I think people choose to suffer sometimes because of what they get from others.
100%. That's why I said there's so many layers to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, please give to me, take care of me, see my value because of what I've gone through. Instead of saying, this has happened to me, but I want to, it's almost like coming out of the cocoon and having that rebirth and saying, these things happen to me, but it doesn't define me.
So one of the things I want to share about this is something we've talked about in a quote that you like.
Correct.
Is you are not your actions. You are not a prisoner of your mistakes. It's a self-imposed prison. And when we hold on to guilt and shame, but the keys to escape are within you.
Correct.
So let go of the past, forgive yourself, learn from it, and move on.
You know, in your office, you have the door and we have all these keys around your door.
Yep.
And what
we actually have a door as artwork in
yeah.
my office, and it's surrounded by keys and doorknobs. Yeah.
And then it's like many doors will open. It's deciding whether you're going to open a different door than your story. And I think we do imprison ourselves and we lock the door to what happened. And so we're in prison. And guess what? You don't have to be in prison with that story. It's like, you have the keys. You may not want to unlock it. You may not want to move forward. You may not feel like you can, but trust me, there are people that have suffered so much that still are able to walk this earth and make a change. One of my favorite examples, of course, is Nelson Mandela. And do you remember what he said when he left prison? You want to talk about his quote?
Sure.
Because I really love what he said, because we're talking about the doors.
Yeah. So this is Nelson Mandela. As I walked out the door toward the gate that would lead to my freedom, I knew if I didn't leave my bitterness and hatred behind, I'd still be in prison.
And that's exactly it. He left prison, but he knew that he could not still be in prison. And that's what I think we do in our suffering, is we stay in a place of suffering instead of seeing other possibilities.
I think it becomes comfortable for some.
Thank you. That's where I was going to go. Yes, absolutely. The suffering becomes comfortable and we don't want to get out of our comfort zone.
Yeah.
And of course, in all my classes that I teach, with especially the solutions program, is getting people out of their comfort zone, because even if it's painful, it's pain we understand. And that's why we attract very similar relationships. And that's the law of attraction. So if you're suffering, you will attract stories of people suffering that will add to your story. And there's a lot
we feel guilty.
Right.
If we're in grief, we feel guilty by moving forward and having joy and happiness. It's the whole guilt and shame thing that comes back up again.
It's a cycle.
Yeah.
And we seem that we can't get off the merry-go-round. some of the things that I've done in my classes, and you've been to all my classes or seen me, is about how we tell our story. And we take passion in actually telling our story of what happened to us. I used to be this way. And there's times where I still will go like, this is what happened to me. But we put so much value, our identity into it, that it becomes just like, I think part of it is almost a shock value. This is what happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
So what I think is important, and this is how we change our behavior. So if the suffering and you don't realize it, and you're constantly going in and closing that door and not using a key to open up to try new things, it's understanding the vibration of the energy you're using. So if you're telling the story a lot to people, this is what my recommendation is. This is how you change it. And one of them is to record the story, tell the story on your phone, record it, and guess what? Listen to it several times a day.
Mm-hmm.
And basically
it'll make you throw up.
I would say, have you ever been drunk on something or had food poisoning? That's what it feels like. When you tell your story, you're releasing that energy. Mm-hmm. But that person then takes on it, and you feel good because someone has empathy and compassion. So you actually feel and get stuff from it, knowing that, yes, you have been suffering, and yes, you have a reason to go there. Mm-hmm. But when you record it and listen to it yourself, you'll realize what you're telling the universe. And the more you listen to it, the more you don't want to have that story.
Yeah. And this isn't for, obviously, you want to share your story with people. It's not that you can't talk about what's happened to you, but in what context are you sharing that story? Are you sharing your story? Like, I struggled being able to tell my story because I didn't want the pity. There were things that I didn't want to experience. And I actually get very uncomfortable with people giving me empathy when I tell my story.
Okay, I'm not giving you any more empathy or compassion.
I know it's really hard. It's hard to accept that, but I feel like there are people who retell their story over and over again that feed off of that.
It almost creates a momentum. Oh, I'm so sorry.
Okay.
It creates that feeling of, yes, you're correct. That person shouldn't have done that to you. Mm-hmm. And what we want to happen is we want that other person to suffer, which is why we think about, I want them to be in prison. I want them to feel miserable. What happens is that person or that situation has moved on. You're the one suffering. You're the one that's allowing that person to make you suffer, because what they did to you, you're still saying, yes, I'm still suffering.
You're still giving them power.
You're still giving them power.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So repeating the story is, what power do you want behind that? And again, there's nothing wrong with sharing the story when we both share our stories, but it's also important not to suffer from that story. It's like, this is an experience. This is what happened to me, but this is where I am today. That doesn't define me. And none of us are pioneers when it comes to divorce, changing jobs, getting through an illness, moving, whatever the logic is. This is not new. We've all been through it. And I always joke with people, like when they go, well, I'm getting divorced and my kids are here and I'm really worried. I'm like, you're not a pioneer. It's happened before you. And not that I don't have empathy and compassion. What it means, though, is there's so much, like you said, guilt and shame again with that story versus, thank goodness you're showing your kids that happiness and devotion to yourself and all those things are more important than what you were going through.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest things I think is difficult is when we're growing up. And this is another thing I want to talk about, is change. And this goes along with how do you change the suffering? And when we grow up, we have this idea of what life should look like. We may go to college, we may have our careers, we may get married and have children. So we have this fantasy idea, but through all life, there's always change. Nothing is concrete. Change is inevitable. But most of us, like you said earlier, we want to be comfortable. Even the suffering becomes comfortable. So are we willing to seek change, or do we want to stay where it's comfortable with suffering and pain and those kind of things? But I look in the mirror and go, really? I'm changing again? We do. We change. Life is going to change. The weather changes, life changes, the earth changes. And it's going to the place of embracing that things are going to change. And are we okay with leaning into that? And I always like to talk about, how do we start embracing change? I mean, you live with me and I kind of made you crazy, right?
No, only a little bit.
Only a little bit. but I think it's adapting and changing. And I think to get a little bit comfortable with change is just trying something new, wearing a different color.
Yeah.
Wearing, going to a restaurant you normally wouldn't go to. I try to keep, I teach KISS, keep it simple, sweetie. Going to a restaurant and ordering something you would normally not order. We do go into our habits. I mean,
yeah, we do too.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, whenever there's fish and chips, what do? Fish
Order
and chips,
fish and
chips
chips.
versus can you try?
Even if you're on a diet.
If I'm on a diet, especially when I'm on a diet or a cleanse. But I think part of it is, are we willing to expose ourselves to something different that might bring us the ability to see life differently? I know when people come to a psychic or a medium, there's a lot of fear.
Yeah, always.
And for some people, seeing me, we prepare them so that they're comfortable, because they even think about, maybe I shouldn't do this, whatever the belief is, versus thinking as life as an experience. So I know I love to ride horses, and I got you to take.
You did.
Yeah. So that
which was one of the best experiences I've had ever. I took lessons riding horses so that we could ride together, and I loved it.
You're good.
I would like to do it more, but I had a fear around it. And learning to groom them and not be afraid of this big animal.
This 1,600 pounds.
They're really gentle.
They are.
And it's just, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
But
it's incredible.
As we age, especially, people don't want to try anything new or different. They get really in their comfort zone. That's closing the door, locking the door, and saying, this is my world. And I've heard people say, well, I don't do that, or I'm not comfortable doing that. Or especially when I try to get someone to go out dating for the first time, I get on a site and they go, I'm not comfortable doing that. And I'm like,
I'm never going to
do that. And I'm like, oh, geez, the whole fear.
It's just getting through the fear. It's not that you have to meet somebody on a dating site. It's put yourself out there, tell the universe, and get through that fear of putting yourself out there. It's an easy, non-threatening way to do it.
But people get so worked up. I'm like, it's just an app. I had someone
There's
today,
no threat to it.
I had someone tell me today, like, you really like your apps, don't you? And I'm like, I kind of laugh, like, yeah, because I think in this day and age, I mean, me growing up, if anyone is my age, I'm going to be 62 next month, April. We had a phone that was a party line. We were outside playing for hours on hours. We drank out of the hose. It was, we only had 3 channels on the TV. Now we have so much access to the world, but we still are in fear of accessing the world, which is really that limiting belief again about, I'd rather suffer than find a partner, or I want to suffer versus finding happiness. And that really is a choice. You're choosing to suffer versus finding happiness from your story. And I think that's the big thing. This is what I thought about too, as another idea is, we talk about fake it till you make it, right? But part of it is when you just fake a smile, it does change your energy. And I think it changes people's, I guess it takes, from what I read, less muscles to smile than it is to frown.
I think also if you smile at somebody, it not only changes your energy, but it changes theirs.
You just
automatically.
You just don't want to smile and be weird, like somebody's gonna think you're weird. However, like you and I,
like walking around with a Joker smile on.
Yeah, you want to be careful with that. But you and I went the other day to return some stuff from Amazon. It was at Kohl's, and we walked up, and customer services these days can be a little bit challenging. But we walk up and this lady goes, "Hi, how you doing? Great to see you. What can I do for you?" I'm like, "Wow." I said, "Really? You've got great energy." Yeah. So I said to her, and you were there, and she goes, "Well, some people have a bad day, and I just want people to know that I'm here." That to me, we said to her, "Thank you," because really, why can't you just smile and fake it and let people know that you're okay, and be able for people to say, "Oh, I got a smile today." And not make it weird. I know another time that you and I, this was just less than a month ago, we were at another shopping area and there was a homeless man sitting between Home Goods, remember this, and Target. And we didn't have any cash on us to give to him, but he flashed the peace sign. And I smiled back and I flashed the peace sign. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And he goes, "No one has done that in return." And he had this huge smile on his face for someone that acknowledged that
his existence.
and didn't shame him. Well, we don't know his backstory.
No.
And the fact that he
was
was
just a guy sitting on a bench and you knew he was homeless.
yeah,
But
absolutely kindness. And I showed kindness, and he just says, no one has done that.
And he said, you made my day.
Not
but
like
you probably made his month.
Yeah. And it's not like who said you make my day? That's the Clint Eastwood. It wasn't that kind of make my day. But too, when you're really suffering, if you're really in a hard place, when you help other people feel better about their life, it does enrich yours.
Do you remember the guy in the McDonald's line that was yelling at me?
I think we've told the story on the podcast before, but you
might
tell it again,
but it just popped up in my head. So we were in line to grab a drink or something after,
because we don't eat McDonald's
anyway. So we were in line because it was convenient, and there was a guy behind us. I was actually, we were parked, and I was looking at my phone. I do not look at my phone when I'm driving. If I use GPS, I put it away. Yeah. So, but we were not driving. So
we were in a long two lines.
Yeah, we were in a long McDonald's line. So I was looking at my phone, and he yelled as loud as he could from 2 cars behind us, "Put down your phone." Anyway, so he yelled that, then proceeded to like make all kinds of lewd gestures, and there was no reason for this. We had never seen this guy before in our lives. So he continued to do this and make gestures and flip me off and all that. And I'm just looking at him. He could see me looking at him probably through the mirror, but I wasn't really giving him any energy. And we get up to pay.
There's two windows, one to pay, one to get your order.
Right. So we get up to pay, and I asked what his order was. So we paid for his order because clearly he needed some help. He
more than just his food order
to brighten his day somehow. And yeah, he was a jerk, but maybe it saved him from going home and
saying horrible things
to his partner or whatever. So yeah, I mean, it just
and we didn't get to see, but we took off, and he got his meal, and it was paid for. So we were both very curious what his shift was in that energy,
if there was even a shift. And
I think there has to be something in a human that says, wow, why should I have done that? And maybe I need to rethink it. But I think it's when you pay forward and not take the energy of being angry, it can help other people. And that's that ripple effect. And you will get it in return. Because when we had that homeless guy said, you made my day. No one has done that. It really hit my heart.
Yeah.
And we do a lot of things for people. But when it comes to that situation, and I wanted to go back because we got some cash so I can go back and give it to him, and he was there.
Gone, yeah.
But the fact that I did the piece, he just smiled, and he just said, thank you. And it's the same thing. It's just like, what are you doing with your life and the pain of others, and the pain? What are you doing with your pain? And it really is about, one of the other things I wanted to talk about is when you smile, it's really about transforming your life. But when you help other people and it transforms them, it does make a difference for you.
It fills your bucket.
Like when we talk about Julie or anyone that we know that chooses to make a difference from their experiences, people do heal from it. There is a value to your story, but maybe not in the suffering, but how do you help people through what you've been through?
So you're raising your vibration, and you're raising their vibration, which helps the world.
Yeah. And I think the biggest thing is your suffering is not going to make a difference at all. And so part of it is, do you want a pity party or do you want a fun party? If you sent out invitations to people and said, I'm having a pity party, come, how many people would really want to join?
Right.
Again, this doesn't take away from your grief, your losses, the things that are difficult. This is about having only one tool that says, I'm only going to suffer through this. Begin to make changes. And I know this is kind of redundant, but again, listening to your story, giving back, that your story is much more than what happened to you a year ago, 6 months ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago, whatever the story is. It's not important for you to make it more important. And I think the biggest thing that I want to say, people say that, I'm broken. I'm like, I love this saying, you're bent, not broken. You're not broken. You've had some experiences that bruise us, but those things can be healed. And the people that I want to be around are the people that have been through difficult, horrible, life-changing situations, but they come out of it to be able to help the world and tell their story.
Mhm.
No one wants to listen to a story that you're still living it 20 years later. They want to hear what you did to overcome it, because that empowers people.
It does.
With all of this, it's to really change your mindset, to realize that you have the power within you to change the way you are living and grieving. It is that you do have the keys to open doors to other types of living, other experiences. And when you open yourself up to those things, the world, what do they say? The world is your oyster. Yeah, I don't know if that's still true. Yeah, but it's, how do you realize that there's so much more than what happened in the past? And again, it is a choice to suffer, and it's a choice to be able to heal, live life, be a leader for others, showing other people that you can get through this, versus living in the, I keep getting like this swampy kind of low energy. Who wants to live in that? And you get to decide how you want to go about this. You and I have had lots of life experiences that we've shared, but we also want and believe that there's more to life than those things. Do you agree?
I agree.
As long as you agree with me, I'm really great. But it's finding others that are like-minded. It's finding a community that you can feel supported and also be able to support others. Do not become consumed in that story. And the suffering is a choice. Grief is grief, but you don't have to live in suffering, which are two different things. I hope that this podcast will really help you understand that there are choices. You don't have to live in that. Make a choice to change. Thank you for joining us once again.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. Each Monday is a new episode of Spirited Straight Talk. Make sure you hit follow so you don't miss any of the guidance or bonus episodes. Your experience at the show means a lot to us, and we would love for you to leave a review or let us know about more topics you would like Deb to explore. You can also follow Deb on social media and connect with her website at debshepherd.com. That's DEBSHEPPARD.com. If you want to join Deb on one of the shows or have a reading from her on the show, you can submit a request on the podcast page of her website. Thank you again, and see you next week.